Thank you for joining us. The following program is presented by Rico Cortes.
Shalom, welcome back to part 3 of the Covenant of the Pieces, Abraham and the Covenant of the Pieces. We are going to be talking about the ancient Middle Eastern covenants. In last program I spoke about the word. Who was there present when Abraham was sleeping? Remember? The column of fire like a furnace walking between the pieces. Who was that? Now, let me review something really quickly. We know that in Judaism there's a teaching that is talking about a particular messenger who has the name of the Father, who is the high priest in the heavenly tabernacle, who intercedes on behalf of Israel, who's the keeper of Israel. And I show you the Sidurs in which they talk about that they're praying in the name of Yeshua, the high priest, and the ministering angel. Okay, now, the unity of the Father or the Son is such thing that we cannot understand. The Father is too great and too big for him to be known. No man can see the Father and live. So the Son is the emanation. In other words, what he is the image, like Paul says, of the invisible God, in which he can convey the message to the people. He speaks through his word, just as he did in creation. This is not really a new concept. The Bible really emphasizes all over the place. But unfortunately, modern Judaism doesn't see it that way anymore because of the teachings of, the Catholic Church and how they try to divide and do all kinds of stuff in their theology. But the unity of the Father and the Son is such that we cannot understand. And I'm not trying to say, Yeshua is not the Father, but the Father and Yeshua are one. In other words, Yeshua comes from the Father. I mean, the Messiah comes from the Father. He is the image of the invisible God. That's the whole idea. Okay, my Father is greater than I. Me and my Father are one. You see, so there's a purpose. There's something going on between them two that we don't quite understand. Okay, so anyway, but Yeshua is pre-existent. Yeshua was from the beginning of the earth, from beginning of foundation. He was there. He was there, and he comes from the Father. That's difficult to understand. But we have to have the essence of faith on this one. We're just trying to find out now what we can understand. Who was there? In Genesis 15, I believe it was the word of the Lord, the Memra, the Logos, that later on we see revealed to the people on humanity as Yeshua. But Yeshua, the word of the Lord back then in the Tanakh was not called Yeshua. Yeshua is the role of the Messiah when he was born, salvation of Yah. Shua, Yahshua, Yeshua, salvation. When he was born, he was bringing salvation, reconciliation, justification and sanctification to Israel and anybody who calls upon the name of the Lord. So therefore, the name Yeshua is an important name. Why? Because it is the role of the Messiah when he came to the earth. But in truth, the name of the Messiah is just like the one of his father, Yahweh. You see? But it doesn't mean that he is the Father. We don't know what the Father looks like. We know that it says he has no image or form. We can't even conceive that. We can only see the Father through the eyes of the Son. The revelation of the Son. Better? Okay, good. The consequences of breaking covenant. In Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 18 to 20 says this. I want you to notice the language because it's going to use exactly the same language as in Genesis 15. And I will give the men who have transgressed my covenant, who have not stood on the words of the covenant which they have cut with me, and they cut the calf in two, and passed between his parts, the rulers of Judah and the rulers of Jerusalem, the eunuch and the priest, and all the people of the land who pass between the parts of the calf. See? I will even give them into the hand of their enemies and into the hands of those seeking their life, and their dead bodies will be for food to the birds of the heaven and to the beasts of the earth. Therefore, the consequences of breaking covenant is death. Ancient covenants, if you walked through the pieces and you didn't live up to the end of the bargain, of the end of the commandments of what was established as a covenant, you pay the price of death. Israel, we know, went away from Yahweh. Jeremiah 3 tells you that. The book of Ezekiel tells you that. And Yahweh sent the prophets. Go get my people. And he sent the prophets to regather his exiles in the world. He sent the prophets to entice Israel to come back. Hosea, he was told to marry a prostitute. Isaiah, walk around naked. Why? Naked 3 years. To show the children of Israel that they are as naked, that they're exposing their nakedness because they're worshiping other gods. That I will leave them naked if they break the covenant. Hosea, marry a prostitute and have children of prostitution. Why? To show that that Israel is as Gomer, walking in prostitution, not being faithful to the original groom of the covenant. You have Jeremiah not getting married. Don't get married, to show that if you do not obey the covenant, we can be in covenant with you. You're going to be going to Babylon. You're going to have pay. I mean, there's so many teachings trying to tell us about how Yahweh tried to reconcile with Israel. But Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, they moved away and they worshiped the gods of the heathen. But you see, because Abraham was there and the pillar of fire walked through, the word of the Lord walked through the pieces, and the word of the Lord walked through the pieces by itself. Abraham was sleeping. I'm going to read you that now so you understand where I'm coming from. Genesis 15. Let's go right to the text so we can study this out. And it's very, very interesting information. After these things, the word of Yahweh came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, I am your great reward. Now we know that the great reward, I am your shield, and your reward exceedingly great, right? We saw that in the Targum it says that it was the word of Yahweh who will be exceedingly great, and the shield. That means that it will be the Messiah who comes and defends us in the Great Tribulation. Why? Because He is our shield. He is our protector. He is our King. Now, in chapter 2, in verse 2 says, And Abram said, Yahweh Elohim, what would you give me? For I will die childless, and Eliezer of Damascus of my household will be the heir. I got to read you the whole chapter, otherwise it won't make any sense. And Abraham says, Behold, you have given me no sons, and behold, one of the members of my household will be my heir. Then Yahweh said to him, This man shall not be your heir, but your own son that shall come out of your own loins shall be your heir. Okay, and it says, And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, So shall your descendants be. Remember when I told you earlier that it says, and in you, it says, and in you all the nations of the earth shall be grafted in? Well, wait a minute. You can count the Jews right now. There are 14, 15 million Jews right now. You can count them, literally. But you cannot count all of Israel. The Jews is only one of the tribes. Okay? But the 12 tribes of Israel is more than just 14 million. It is estimated it's maybe 500 million worldwide. They don't even know. Maybe even more. Let's go back to the text. Verse 6 says, And Abraham believed Yahweh, and it was counted to him for righteousness. What did he believe? That he will have many descendants. And he said to him, I am Yahweh who brought you out of the land, out of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to inherit. And Abram said, O Yahweh Elohim, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And then he says this. And he said to him, Take for yourself. You see, that was a promise. I'm going to give you this land to inherit. How are we going to do it? I'm going to make a covenant with you. And how did he make the covenant? This is why we have to go back to the land. Why? Because Yahweh made the covenant that He would inherit the land on verse 8. Okay? Verse 7 says, I am Yahweh who brought you out of Ur and of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. How would I know? Okay, let's talk about terms. Okay, and He said, take for yourself a heifer, 3 years old, a 3-year-old ram, a 3-year-old she-goat, a pigeon, a young dove, and he took to himself all these and cut them in two and laid each piece against another, but the birds he did not divide. Right? And now, and when the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. And lo, fear and great darkness fell upon him. Now you know that in the Bible, sleep and death is synonymous. Very significant. Because in verse 11 says that the birds of prey will come and drive the carcasses away. You know, he will come to eat away the meat that was there for the sacrifice. Let me give you spiritual application to this. Anybody that you know that wants to come back to the Torah, want to come back to the Sabbath, want to come back to the feast, want to come back to what Yahweh says, you will find somebody in your family or somebody in your church, somebody in your friendships who will tell you, no, you don't have to do that. They're trying to keep you away from the covenant with Yahweh. Don't let that happen. Now here, this is very significant, and we're going to spend the rest of our time in this time right here. Why? Because Abram is trying to do away with the birds, get them away, and Yahweh says, listen, there's nothing you can do to keep this covenant from happening. Go to sleep. And when he went to sleep, it says that when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and lo, fear and great darkness fell upon him. And Yahweh said to Abram, Know of a surety that your descendants shall be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and you shall be in servitude, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. But I will judge the nation that they shall serve, and afterward they shall come out with great wealth. And you shall depart from this life and go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried in good old age. Well, wait a minute, that makes no sense to me. What kind of covenant is that? Oh, I'm going to bless you. You're going to be like the sands of the sea, you know, like the stars, right? But you know what? This is what's going to happen. Walk through the pieces. I'm going to do the covenant with you. But then, you know what? They're going to be slaves for 400 years. And then they're going to live. They're going to be wealthy. And then they're going to, but you're going to die. You're not going to see all this happening. That, you know, logically, that makes no sense. Because it's like, wait a minute, what kind of covenant is this? Because he is looking for a covenant for the end of times. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. As we continue reading, verse 18 says, on that day Yahweh made a covenant with Abram. Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, but we got a problem. Abram's sleeping. He's not walking through the pieces with a pillar of fire. And it says, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, to the river Euphrates. Now, oh, that's very significant. Because the original condition of the covenant, that if the children of Israel would obey the covenant, that Yahweh would give them all the way from the Nile River, all the way through Saudi Arabia, the Sinai Peninsula, all the way down to the Euphrates. In other words, we would control 90% of all the oil in the world. We will be the most prosperous nation right now. And what are we doing right now? We are trying to fight with the Palestinians who don't belong there to give us a little piece of the land. When that land belongs to us, it belongs to us because Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham, our forefather. And if you believe in that covenant, then you have to want to go back to the land. Okay? Otherwise, then you're not fulfilling that covenant. We continue. What is the word covenant in Hebrew? Brit. The word covenant in Hebrew means, in the sense, it comes from the Hebrew Strong's 1262, in the sense of cutting. Like in Hebrews Strong's 1254, which says compact, because made by passing between the pieces of flesh. Confederacy, covenant, league. So if you came in covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you can have your own church over here and says, I don't belong to Israel, but I want the benefits of all the blessings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, if you come in covenant with Yahweh through Yeshua, our high priest, who died on our behalf, and you become now part of that covenant, you've been grafted in, then you're part of the confederacy, you're part of the league, you're part of the covenant. You walk between the pieces. Because when you confess Yeshua, you walk. That's why Paul says, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourself as a living sacrifice. You come into a covenant, now you become the sacrifice. Yeshua paid the price. Of what? That if you willfully, that if you unwillfully, that if you mistakenly break the commandments, remember breaking the covenant means death? But Yeshua made sure that if you break the covenant because of your evil inclination, remember what Paul talks about in Romans 7? That I will to do, I don't do, and that I don't will to do, I don't do. I have a member in my body, sin and death. He's letting you know that Yeshua paid the price. He restored you back into the covenant because Abraham was sleeping. He didn't walk between the pieces. Therefore, whoever broke the covenant must die. Israel broke the covenant. So Yeshua had to die because he's the covenant maker. That's really what he's trying to tell you. Are you getting this? Very significant in our faith. Now we understand why Yeshua had to die. So therefore, if he died on our behalf and then he renewed the covenant, that means that we are no longer going to die forever. That is our reward. We're going to die. We're going to live forever. Why? Because he will take the penalty of death when he comes back in the clouds. He will beat death. And we're going to have everlasting life because he walked through the pieces. Because no matter how good you think you are, no matter how righteous you think you are, we will never be able to keep all the commandments. Because the Torah is not to make you perfect. The Torah is to separate you and to make you holy. For you, to guide you, to lead you into righteousness, Yahweh's righteousness. That's what Torah is all about. To instruct you is the conditions of the covenant. So Mount Sinai was a conditional covenant, but the one in Genesis 15 was unconditional. Why, you may ask? Because in Mount Sinai, the children of Israel agreed that they will obey and do. And then Moses did a sacrifice. He cut the pieces, he slaughtered the animal, he took half of the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and sprinkled it on the book. Therefore, now, it's conditional. You must obey to receive the blessing. If you disobey willfully, rebelliously, you'll be cut off. You'll be gone. See, that's the difference. So this is an unconditional covenant of grace. What happened in Genesis 15, the reason why Yeshua had to resurrect was to restore Israel back so that you, Gentiles, will be justified to come in if you want to and be part of the household of God and keep the Sabbath and keep the feast and eat kosher and pray 3 times a day and do exactly what Yahweh says to do. We continue. Exodus 19:5 says this. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. So, let's read it backwards. The earth is Yahweh's, right? And you will be a peculiar treasure above all the people if you keep the covenant. And if you keep the covenant, it's because you obeying the voice. So if you don't obey the voice, you don't keep the covenant, then you're not a special people. So if you accept Yeshua in covenant, and then you say, no, I don't want to follow the commandments, then you're breaking covenant, and you're being spiritual adultery. And then no wonder there's so much chaos and sickness and divorce in the church. Because we're living in constant covenant breaking. We come into a covenant when we accept Yeshua, and the next Sunday they're teaching you to break it. Because Sunday is not the day that Yahweh chose. Sabbath is the day He chose. It's holy and separated for Him. It's His day, not our day. We continue, Genesis 17. I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Remember that it was the word of the Lord who made the covenant. As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. We already know that. Genesis 17:7 says, and I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your seed after you, in their generation, for an everlasting covenant, to be an Elohim unto you, and to your seed after you. Some of you that are teaching that God did away with Israel, you better take a look at this verse right here. Because the covenant has to do, the covenant has to do with Abraham. And if you are calling yourself the son of Abraham, then you have to understand that the covenant is with Abraham, with Isaac and Jacob, and the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And this verse in Genesis 17:7 is very specific. It says, I will establish my covenant between me and you, Abram, and your seed after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant, leolam, forever, to be an Elohim to you, and your seed after you. That means that there's no way that Yahweh can do away with His people. Why? Because He made a covenant with Abraham. And He walked through the pieces for His own great name, for His right hand's sake. Not by virtue of our righteousness, not because of our virtue of our name, but because He is faithful and He is true and He walks through the pieces. Therefore, He can never do away with His people Israel, because He made the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and its descendants. So if you want to be part of the covenant, you have to be part of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Otherwise, you cannot be redeemed, you cannot be reconciled, you cannot be justified or sanctified. So therefore, salvation is not for you. The covenant is with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. The Bible is very clear. The covenant is not with the Gentiles. The Gentiles are grafted in through faith. By grace through faith in Yeshua the Messiah, so that you be part of the household of God. Not that you do your whole entity over there and separate everything and kill the Jews in the name of Jesus like they did in the Crusades and the Inquisitions like the Catholic Church. It will happen again, I tell you. Anyway, so let me give you an example of ancient covenants. And then if we don't have time to cover all of this, then we're going to come back in the next section and we're going to finish it up. The covenant between Jonathan and David. Now, Jonathan and David and Jonathan became great friends. Okay? In 1 Samuel 18, verse 1 and 4 says this. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. Very significant. Because that means that the same principles have to happen when the word of Yahweh walked through the pieces. That's why in prayers you see certain things, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But here is significant. Why is this? Because when Saul died and Jonathan died, you have a big problem. Because Saul was the king of Israel. And as the king of Israel, Saul as the king of Israel, you know that he is the king that was chosen by the people. And David was the one anointed by Yahweh. But you see, you have Saul and then you have his son, Jonathan. They come into covenant between Jonathan and David. You got a problem because if Saul dies, the king has got to be Jonathan. But the anointed king is David. So what is going to happen between them two? They can't break the covenant. Because if somebody breaks the covenant, death happens to them. So the father, I think, did away with that covenant, allowed David to break it in a way. Not to break it. He took Jonathan and Saul at the same time when they died, so therefore David can be king. So what happens? David decides to find any descendants of the house of Saul. He needs to kill them, otherwise they'll raise up against him. There was one of them who was a descendant of Saul, I think it was Jonathan's son, who went away to Ammon or Edom. And he was crippled. He couldn't even walk. And at one time, David was remembering the covenant he made with Jonathan. And he asked the question, who else is there to make a covenant of the house of Saul or Jonathan that I may help? You got to remember that David, at one point, was trying to kill the family of Saul so they would not raise up against him. Now, he's looking for the descendants because he remembered the covenant he made with Jonathan. And the thing is that once you make a covenant with a person, if that person dies, your job and your duty is to do what? To take care of their family forever. So what did David do? He takes them in, he gives them a house within the palace, and he gets to eat with them all the time, and treated him as his own. Because of the love of the true covenant that he made with Jonathan, he honored it even though he knew that was one of his enemies. That's the true love of God that he has for us. That he sent his son to die for you and for me. Because we've disobeyed the covenant. He sent his son to stand in the gap. He loved Abraham so much that he sent his son, his messenger, to say, hey, you know what? Make covenant with Abraham. And I want you to stand in the gap. That if he breaks the covenant of any of his descendants, are you willing to pay the price for him? And the word of the Lord said yes. That's very powerful. It tells us what the plan of Messiah for us. That's the gospel that the book of Romans, the book of Galatians, and the book of Hebrews is talking about. That the covenant maker, who is called Yeshua, who is called the Word, who is called the Rock, all of that took the responsibility and the penalty of death away from us so that we can have everlasting life. Powerful. Very powerful. Now, as we continue to study the steps, on the next program, we're going to finish it up, the series, and we're going to talk about the steps of the 9 steps of an ancient Hebrew covenant. And we're going to connect that with Yeshua and Abraham. Abraham and then Yeshua. How it was fulfilled. The plan of salvation is amazing. The plan of redemption is incredible. How can Yahweh have so much mercy on the people like Israel when we are so disobedient and we don't do things right? You know what it is to send your son to die? Because God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Okay, what does that mean? What it means is that he loved Abraham's faithfulness so much that he sent his son to die on behalf. Why die on behalf? Because it was the original son who made the covenant with Abraham. Walking through the pieces. Abraham sleeping. He cannot walk through the pieces. But it says, whoever breaks the covenant, may what happens to these animals happen to you. Israel disobeyed the covenant and was scattered amongst the heathen because they worship other gods. The 10 tribes of Israel. So how can they come back? Because when you read Daniel and you read Jeremiah, in the book of Daniel, let me go there real quick. Hope I find it really quick. When he's doing the prayer, when he's doing the very important prayer, he uses a language that is very significant. He uses a language that is very significant. And if we understand the way Daniel prayed, then you'll know what he's trying to tell you. Let's see if I find it really quickly here before we have to go. Time runs short when you're having fun, right? Listen to this. Then I says, I prayed to Yahweh my Elohim. I make confession. This is Daniel chapter 9. It says, and say, O Adonai, great and awesome God, who keep his covenant with mercy with those who love him and those who keep his commandments. When Daniel was praying, and he says, you who keep covenant with those who love you, keep your commandments, he means you go back to Genesis 15. Because you made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Therefore, he has to act upon it because he remembers. Remember, he walked through the pieces for his own great namesake, by virtue of his right hand's sake. Not because Abraham deserved it, but because he loved them so much. It was an unconditional covenant, saying that even if you descendants break the covenant, I'll pay the price on your behalf. I'll go out there and stake my life for you. Now that's the true love of God, don't you think? That's the gospel, folks. That's the gospel that Paul is talking about in Galatians. And if you keep reading this prayer, then you go into repentance. We have sinned. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled. Even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. Remember that on Mount Sinai, it was a conditional covenant. That if you obey, I will bless you. But if you will disobey, I will scatter you amongst the heathen. And that happened. And here, the fulfillment of the 70 years, Daniel understood, and he is praying, and the language that he's using is very significant. Yahweh, Elohim, great and awesome Elohim, who keeps covenant and mercy with those who love him and keep his commandments. Why do I believe that Yahweh is my Elohim? Because he keeps covenant with those who love him. And I choose to love him with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my strength. Yahweh is truth, his Torah is truth, Yeshua is truth. Remember, look it all up. Let's go right into the teaching. We have a lot of information in a short time. And we've been talking about the covenant of the pieces, the Abrahamic covenant, the unconditional covenant of grace. Now, in which the word of the Lord walked through the middle of the pieces. And notice, if it's the first time listening to me, you're going to have to retrace your steps and go get first 1, 2, and 3 so you can follow the sequence of events. But on this particular program, we're going to talk about the ancient 9 steps of an ancient Hebrew covenant. Now, the steps of an ancient Hebrew covenant, not only Hebrew but Middle Eastern, and back then, even to this day, they still do almost the same thing in Africa and some other places, but the essence changed a little bit, okay? For example, they in the ancient Hebrew covenant, they never drank the blood. But in Africa, they do the same thing except that they mix the blood and they drink the blood to typify that your blood is mine and mine is yours, that we are one. In this case, Hebrews don't do that. We're not supposed to drink blood of any kind. So what we do, we take wine, which is a type and shadow of blood, and when we take the wine, it's as if we come in covenant. That's why Yeshua said the words that he said, this is the blood of the covenant, this is my blood, and this is my flesh. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Let me go over the 9 steps. Let me tell you about this. If you want to know a little bit more about this, you can get a reference from The Miracle of the Scarlet Thread by Dr. Richard Booker. You know, that's a pretty good book that speaks about this. What I did, you know, I studied about the ancient Hebrew covenants, and then I went expounding a little bit more on it. But if you want a real quick reference about what this is, his book is very, very good. I highly recommend it. And he has this 9 steps. What I did, I spent 5 months studying it. Going over the internet, looking into ancient books, trying to find out about ancient covenants. I found some incredible things. To the point that I found out that when you understand ancient covenants and you read the whole Bible through, that's the only underlying theme. Temple service, the Sabbath, the feast, and the ancient covenants is the underlying theme that speaks and makes you understand what Paul is trying to tell you over here. Because that was something that was very well known in the first century. Ancient covenants were very well known. Okay, and when you came into covenant with somebody, it was a heavy-duty responsibility. You just didn't come in to say, I'm your covenant partner. You just didn't say that. When you came into covenant with somebody, your life depended on it. Because if you broke the covenant, you have to die. That's the penalty. Okay? Now, let's go to all the 9 steps. Taking off the rope and the coat. Taking off the belt. Cutting of the covenant, it's got to be cut, the animals, and then your arm. Raise your arm and mix the blood. Exchange names. You got to make a scar, so there's always a witness that you were in covenant with that person. You give the terms of the covenant, you eat a memorial meal, and then you plant a memorial tree. Very significant. And you can get the essence of this in the Miracle of the Scarlet Thread by Richard Booker. Okay? But this is a very well-known concept in the Middle East. Let's begin with the first one. Remember, we're going to take every single one of those 9, and we're going to try to answer of what happened and what it means in regards to Yeshua, okay? So bear with me. We got a lot of information to go. Let's continue. Genesis 15:1 says, After these things, the word of Yahweh came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, I am your great shield. I am your shield. I am your exceedingly great reward. Interesting. that every day when I pray in the morning, I do this prayer. Fathers, Avot. It says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, right? It says, blessed are you, O Lord our God, okay? The Elohim of our fathers. Elohim Avotai, right? On our fathers. Elohe Abraham, Elohe Yitzhak, Elohe Yaakov. It's the great and mighty and awesome Elohim. Supreme Elohim, who extends loving kindness and is master of all, who remembers the gracious deeds of our forefathers, and who will bring a Redeemer with love to the children's children for his name's sake. King, helper, savior, and protector, blessed are you, O Lord, shield of Abraham. One of the steps of an ancient Hebrew, covenant is that you have to give your shield. Just like Jonathan even gave the bow, everything. In other words, if somebody fights against you, I will fight on your behalf. I take my sword, you give me yours. If somebody wages war with you, I will protect you. I will guide you. And that's why that prayer says that. And they see, if the word of the Lord was the shield of Abraham, that means that he will be the protector, the helper, the savior, and he will be the king. Okay, because he's the shield. So every time you see Israel praying for deliverance, and you see this at war. Sometimes there's war in the Middle East, and all of a sudden you see a soldier standing next to a tank, bombs going out, and he's praying. And he's doing the prayers. And this is the first prayer. So in the middle of the war, he's asking for Yahweh to be a covenant keeper. The covenant keeper, to be the shield, to protect them and guide them. And this is why there are 1.3 billion Muslims. 1.3 billion Muslims cannot defeat 14 million Jews. Because Yahweh is the shield of Abraham. And when you mess with Israel, because Yahweh made a covenant with Israel forever, not only with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but with their seed forever. When the children of Israel call upon the name of Yahweh, and Yahweh remembers the covenant, then he has to act upon his promise, because the condition of the covenant is that if you are in trouble, I will defend you. This is why Abraham defended Lot when Lot got in trouble. Is this making sense to you guys? I hope you're following with me. We're having a good time touching all these concepts in here. Let's continue. In Deuteronomy 33, talks about this. I want you to notice the language that it uses. Covenant language. It says, there is none like unto Elohim of Yeshua, of Israel, who rideth upon the heavens in your help. See that expression, in your help? Has to do with covenant, because he will become your helper. It says, and his excellency on the sky. The eternal Elohim is your refuge. And underneath are the everlasting arms. He shall thrust out the enemy from before you, and you shall say, destroy them. Deuteronomy 33 says, and Israel shall dwell safely alone, and the fountains of Jacob shall be upon the land of corn and wine. Also the heavens shall drop down dew. Happy are you, O Israel, who is like unto you, O people, saved by Yahweh, the shield of your help. See, ancient covenant. And who is the sword of your excellency? Remember that one of the things that used to happen in ancient covenants was what? Exchanging of the sword. Exchanging of the sword. So not only is Yahweh your shield, he is your help, and he is your sword. And that's why Yeshua is coming with a sword coming out of his mouth to destroy the enemy, because he is the one who made the covenant as the word of the Lord. So therefore, if he made the covenant, and one of the conditions is that if the children you're making covenant with are in trouble, you will come and redeem them. You will come and help them. You will come and safely take them to the place of refuge. Let's continue. Psalms 28, verse 6 and 7. Blessed be Yahweh, because he has heard the voice of my supplications. Yahweh is my strength and my shield. My heart trusteth in him. I am helped, therefore my heart greatly rejoiced, and with song I will praise him. Amen. Because he is my shield. Now let's go to the next step. Taking off the belt. See, on the belt, the person had the money, the sword, and the shield. They exchanged it with one another to show how committed they were to the covenant. So if somebody fights, for example, ancient covenants is like this. If you come into an ancient covenant with somebody, you just don't tell them how much money you need. You give them the checkbook and the bank account, and whenever they're in trouble, they can take of your bank account without asking you, because that's what you're doing. You're taking care of the responsibility for them. If I'm in trouble, he helps me. If he's in trouble, I help him. If I die, he takes care of my family as his own. If he dies, I do likewise. But if you walk through the pieces and you come into covenant, but if one of us break the covenant, make what happened to those animals happen to us. And that's what happened with Yeshua. Because the word of the Lord was walking through the midst of the pieces, and Abraham was sleeping. It was the word of the Lord that walked through the pieces, and the children of Israel disobeyed the covenant. So somebody has to die. So the one who made the covenant had to die, which is the word of the Lord. I hope this is making sense to you. And in my opinion, this is very significant. Cutting the covenant. When you cut the covenant in Exodus 19, you come into a covenant. Now Exodus 19 is a conditional covenant. Okay, when you go to the text, you see it. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all the people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. And the children of Israel said, all that Yahweh has said we will obey and do. What happened after the commandments were given? So they come into covenant in chapter 19. Everything Yahweh says we'll obey and do. In chapter 20, he gives you the conditions of the covenant. I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you to the land of Egypt. Okay? You shall not have any other gods before me. You shall not take my name in vain. You shall keep my Sabbath. You shall honor your father and your mother. You shall not, steal. You shall not do this. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not do that. And then after he gives the commandments, then he builds an altar. Why does he build an altar? In Exodus 20, verse 24, an altar of earth shall you make it unto me, and shall sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings. Why? Because if you come into covenant with Yahweh, then you have to put the animals, cut the animals, and shed the blood, because it's by the remission of the blood, by the blood, remission of sins. There has to be blood, because we're talking about ancient covenants. Right? And there you have peace offerings and sheep and your oxen. In all places where I record my name, I will come unto you and I will bless you. In other words, because you're doing covenant, so every time you brought an animal for the sacrifice, it was because you committed a transgression against the commandments. You did something unwillingly. You didn't mean to do it. And you wanted to come near again because you broke the covenant. So he allowed you to bring a sacrifice, present it to the priest. He will cut it. He will shed the blood. And he had your repentance of what you did. So therefore you were right standing with God. He gave you a way to always be in right standing with him. There was only one sin there was no forgiveness for, and that was for willful, defiant, rebellious sin. You died. If you willfully decide not to obey the covenant after you came into it, just like the guy who came in the wilderness and he decided to pick up the sticks on the Sabbath. In the Hebrew, it tells you that he was high-handed, that he will look up to the heavens and says, I will not do it. I will not do it. And God says, okay, you come into a covenant after I redeemed you, after I give you manna, and now you want to do whatever you want, get rid of them. That's how heavy-duty covenants are. So if you're in covenant, understand that this is a commitment. If you accepted Yeshua, this is not serving Yeshua whenever you see fit. This is something to do with commitment, just like a marriage covenant. Let's continue. Verse 25. And if you will make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones. And if you lift up the tool upon it, you shall pollute it. Neither shall you go up by steps unto my altar. Why altar is so important here? Because it represents the authority of Yahweh on the earth. So when you build the altar, now you're saying that he owns you. Okay, that you submit to him in all things. That's what Paul says, and I reiterate on this program. Paul says in Romans 12:1, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves as a living sacrifice. Okay, in other words, now you become covenant maker with him. Isaiah 42:6 says, I have called you in righteousness, and I will hold your hand. I will keep you and give you for a covenant to a people, and a light for a Gentile. The duty of Israel was to be a covenant people, to show the world that they needed to come back to him, but we have never really done that job very well. So let's continue. Isaiah 49:8. Thus says Yahweh, in an acceptable time, and listen to this, in an acceptable time I have heard you. In a day of salvation I've helped you, and I will preserve you, and give you for a covenant of the people, to establish the earth, to cause to inherit it the desolate heritage. In other words, he came into a covenant and it's everlasting. It will not change. So Israel will always be in the land because he made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So when the Great Tribulation comes, we are going to call upon the name of Yahweh, and he will come in the clouds, and he will redeem us, and he will take us back to the land, because that's the promise he's given us here in Isaiah 49:8. Isaiah 54:10 says, for the mountains shall depart. Listen to this. For the mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed. But my kindness shall not depart from you, neither shall my covenant of peace be removed, saith Yahweh, that has mercy on you. Why does he have mercy on you? Because he understood from the beginning that we're not good enough to do it on our own, that the word of the Lord has to go through the pieces, and if Israel will break the covenant, he's still faithful to have mercy, because the condition of the covenant was that he will protect them, he will guide them, he will be their shield and their sword. Now let's go to the next step. We don't have enough time, we're going to try to cover it. Raise the right arm, mix it with blood. You have to raise your right arm and mix it with blood. Matthew 26:64 says, Yeshua said unto him, you have said it, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, coming in the clouds of heaven. In other words, he will come with the right power of the right hand. That's why Yeshua is called the right hand of the Lord. Why? Because that's the right arm that you will raise in ancient covenants. He is he's the lawgiver, he is the covenant maker. And you would only swear by raising your right arm, the strong arm. Okay? 1 Peter 3:22, listen to this. Yeshua, who is gone into heaven and is on the right hand of Elohim, angels and authorities and powers being made subject unto him. In other words, what you see here is that because Yeshua is the covenant maker, he is the right arm, and when you raise your right arm, you come into the oath. That's very significant. Okay, so Peter is telling you about this. And the audience in 1 Peter are the dispersed of Israel. 1 Peter 1:1. He came to the dispersed of the dispersion. Okay? Those who are scattered in the dispersion, who are in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Bithynia, and Asia. So the audience were the Israelites. Okay? Now, Hebrews 10:12 says this. But this man, Yeshua, right, after he had offered one sacrifice for sin forever, sat down on the right hand of the Father, Elohim. Sat down on the right hand of Elohim. Why did he sacrifice himself? Because he was the covenant maker. And he has to give his life because the descendants of Abraham broke the covenant. And because he was the only one walking through the pieces. And the condition is, when you both people walk through the pieces, you raise your right arm, you make it the oath, and then what do? You say, if somebody fights against you, I will fight against him. If there's a need, I will take care of your need. But if you break the covenant, what happened to those animals happens to you. Somebody has to die. So therefore Yeshua offered up himself. Why? Because he was the covenant maker, and Abraham was sleeping, and he didn't walk through the pieces. But the descendants of Abraham did suffer of the penalty of disobedience, which is dispersion from the land. Yeshua's death and resurrection brought them back into right standing with Yahweh the Father. Exodus 24, verses 1 on says this. And he said unto Moses, come unto Yahweh, you and Aaron, and Nadab and Abihu, 70 elders of Israel, and worship ye afar. And Moses alone shall come near Yahweh, and they shall not come at night. Neither shall the people go up with them. Listen to this. They come into a covenant. So what happens? And Moses came and told all the people all the words of Yahweh and all the judgments, and all the people answered in one voice and said, all the words which Yahweh has said we will do. At that moment, they came into a covenant. Now you have to cut the pieces. So what does he do? And Moses wrote all the words of the covenant, all the words of Yahweh, and rose up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill, with 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. In other words, the commandments are given. They agree to the commandments. Now you have to have blood to ratify it. And it's 12 pillars, 12 tribes. It's not with the Gentiles. It's with Israel. But what's interesting, there were Gentiles among them. There were strangers, ger. The Hebrew was ger, G-E-R. They're not pagan heathens. They're the gers. They are the strangers who dwell with them. Let's continue. He sent young men of the children of Israel, which offer burnt offerings and sacrifice peace offerings, oxen unto Yahweh. And Moses, listen to what he does. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in a basins, and half of the blood, and he sprinkled on the altar, ratifying the covenant. He took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the covenant of the people. That's basically telling you the conditions of the covenant. And they said, all that Yahweh has said we will do and be obedient. And Moses took the book and sprinkled it on the people. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold the blood of the covenant, which Yahweh had made with you concerning all his words. So now you have what? All the makings of an ancient covenant. You have Yahweh coming and making a covenant with Israel. Moses being the mediator. Through Moses, the mediator. Remember that when Israel broke the covenant, Moses went back up to the mountain and says, blot me out, killed me. He took responsibility for the sins of Israel. Okay, very significant. So what's interesting here now, everybody says we will obey and be obedient, and he takes the blood, and he sprinkles it on the people, and he sprinkles it on the covenant. Very significant. This is part of the ancient covenant. And this is why Yahweh always saved them in the wilderness and protected them from the Amalekites and the Edomites and possessing of the land. Continue. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 26 says, for if we'll sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, therefore remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful look in expectation of judgment, and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversary. He who despises Moses' law dies without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay? How much more sore punishment, suppose ye, shall be thought worthy, who has trodden under foot the Son of Man, the Son of Elohim, and has counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified unholy thing, and has done despise unto the Spirit of grace. In other words, if you renounce Yeshua, you are basically breaking the covenant. You're breaking the covenant and you will die. It's very significant because he's the covenant maker. Let's go to the next step, exchanging of names. I hope I'll have time. The exchanging of name in Genesis chapter 17, after Abraham comes in covenant with the word of the Lord, there's an exchange of name. Abraham's name is no longer Abram, it's Abraham in verse 5. And your name shall be Abraham, for the father of many nations I made you. Well, which letter was added to his name? Is the letter Hey. In the screen you see it. The letter Hey is the name of the name added to the name Abraham. The letter Hey represents the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of the living God. The same letter was added to the name of Sarai, to Sarah. And that's what you have. Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey, Yahweh. You see, Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. And the letter Hey typifies the breath. Okay? Isaiah 62 verse 1 says this, for Zion's sake I will not hold my peace, for Yerushalayim's sake I will not rest, until the righteousness thereof go forth as brightness, and the salvation thereof as a lamp that burn. It says, and the Gentiles shall see the righteousness and know the kind of thy glory, and you shall be called by a new name. You see that? So therefore now we have a new name. Now in Revelation it's the same thing. He that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit said unto the churches. To him that overcometh I will give to eat of his manna, and I will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, that no man knoweth, and that he that received it. Him that overcometh I will make a pillar in the temple of my Elohim, and shall go out no more. And I will write upon him the name of my Elohim, and the name of the city of Elohim, which is the new Jerusalem, which come down out of heaven from my Elohim, and I will write upon him my new name. So you see now that you get with the new names. Scars. Now you see the scar? Let's go back to the next step of the ancient Hebrew covenant. Scar. You have to have a scar on your hand. Okay? So you have the scar to prove that you were in covenant with that other person. So where do we see this in the covenant with Abram? Well, how come he didn't say, cut your ears so everybody will see that you're in covenant with me? He says, no, you're going to have circumcision on the 8th day. Why do you have the circumcision of the 8th day? Because if I'm making a covenant with you and your seed and your other seeds be forever, then I want it to come from the location where the seed comes from. So everybody would know that you are in covenant with me. So circumcision originally was done by the Hebrews only. And then now the nations, everybody does it. But what's interesting is that circumcision is more than just circumcision. It has to do with showing the world that you and your descendants are always in covenant with Yahweh. So if you break the covenant, you will pay with death. So you have to consider that if you're a Jew and you're not following Torah, you go understand that you came in covenant when you were circumcised, and your bar mitzvah, you took responsibility for that covenant. And now you got to pay the consequences of it if you break it. Okay? Let's see if we can finish this up. Yeshua was showing the covenant. He showed the sign of the covenant. How did he do that? In John chapter 20, when Thomas asked to touch the wounds of Yeshua, when he asked to touch the wound, hey, okay, I don't believe he did. I got to see it. I got to see it. So Yeshua says, hey, come on over here. Put your hands in my wound. Put your hands on my side and believe. See, we have to be a little bit like Thomas. When the anti-Messiah comes, one way to identify the anti-Messiah? You ask him, show me your hands and show me your side. Because he's going to deceive many. How do you know if he's the Messiah of Israel or if he's the Antichrist? Tell him to show you your hands. And the last step of an ancient Hebrew covenant is do a memorial meal. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cover this next time. On the next program, I'm going to go over and some of these again, do review. And then, because I really want to take my time and finish it up, okay? So please come back to me, because as we go here, they got terms. You give the terms of the covenant. So as we do this, and you see the signs, remember that Yeshua had the wounds, and Thomas saw it, and he believed, so that he showed the signs of the covenant. Now you have to also have here, giving of the terms of the covenant. There are terms to the covenant. What are those terms? The commandments of Yahweh. But with whom did he make the covenant with? That's the question. And that's where you enter. If you're not a Jew, if you're not an Israelite, and you're a Gentile who wants to be part of the household of God, then you better come back on the next program, because I'm going to explain to you how is it that you become in covenant with the Yahweh of Elohim. The Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The great and mighty Elohim. The supreme Elohim. The one who keeps covenants with those who love him and keep his covenants forever. I'll tell you, this is exciting. We're learning the reason why Yeshua had to die. And we are reviewing ancient covenants in the ancient world. So please stay tuned and come back, because you know what? Yahweh will bless you and keep you if you obey and you obey his commandments, and you will not be the tail, but you will be the head. And you will be blessed in your city and out of your city. That's what he promised.
If you would like more information about Wisdom in Torah and any other future teachings, please visit www.wisdomintorah.com. Now we leave you with the Aaronic blessing. Shalom.
פניו אליך ויחונך יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Amen.